thing from another world. This is the spot where it was first seen, and these are the first people who saw the thing. How did it get here? Where did it come from? What is it?
That thing's alive, sir. I saw it. I shot at it. I hit it. I know it. Nothing happened. It just kept coming at me, making a noise like a cat mewing. Captain, it was awful. You could have seen those hands and those eyes. Captain, you've got to do something about it. You've got...
Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly? Baffling questions, astounding questions that not even the world's greatest scientific minds can answer.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as one pole from the other. If we can only communicate with it.
See? What happened, Doctor?
In the greenhouse, I was working, I couldn't see.
Yeah.
Then a blast of cold air, and I heard Olson scream.
Come here. Get in the corner. Now hold this in front of you. Stay by the light switch.
1.9. Needles at the top.
Hello, Ken Spriggs here, starting a new build on a model kit. This is my another entry into the Halloween group build for SciFiantasy Halloween International. I know I said in my last video that I was going to work on the War of the Worlds figure, but I decided to go ahead and try something different. I was kind of thinking about some other figures that I could build and looking around and trying to get some ideas. And one of the ones that I've always liked and I wanted to try to build is the Thing from Another World, the original classic black and white from 1951. So I looked around because I know I had seen some figures on the internet, some pictures, but I couldn't find anything that's available. I could see some pictures of people that obviously made something, probably like a resin kit, but I couldn't find any means of getting it, so they may not be available anymore. I also tried Amazon and eBay, so nothing came up. So I won't be deterred, so I'm going to go ahead and build my own and kit bash it. So what I'm doing is I kind of thought up some ideas and looked at some kits and tried to think of some ones that would be good for using the parts to make a kit. And the ones that I came up with that I think are going to work the best are going to be these two right here, Frankenstein from Mobius, mainly because of his head, and that looks a lot like the Thing and his body, and then also the Invisible Man, which I just completed. Because of his legs have a better stance, and I could possibly use his arms and other things. So I'm going to go ahead and kit bash these two kits and put them together to create my own Thing from Another World. From 1951. I also want to give a shout out to SciFiantasy or HobbyLink International for one of their giveaways. Recently, I won a Badger Chrome airbrush. Really awesome, which I received in the mail from Kenny Conklin. Really nice airbrush. Really well made, really well done from Badger. I haven't had one of theirs before. My previous brush, airbrush, was a Iwata, or a Neo for Iwata. From what I understand, it's not really one of theirs. It's made in China. I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't bad. I'll probably keep it as a workhorse airbrush, but I'm really happy with this new one, and I've used it a few times, and I'll use it on this kit. So definitely really pleased with that. So. Thanks again. Definitely head over to that site. A lot of great things going on there, a lot of great builders, some giveaways, some group builds, things of that nature. So by all means, check that out. It's hobbylinkinternational.com. And if you want to click on the community, you can go on there and join it and join the group builds and see a lot of great work. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at at the building of this thing from another world. All right, so I'm doing some fitting of the different parts between the two kits, and I think they're going to work out just fine. Definitely some modification is going to be needing to be done, and some build up of some of the parts. I'm going to be using epoxy sculpt to do that. Some of their white epoxy sculpt right here, brand new. I got it the IPMS convention in Tennessee. So I've used this kind of product before, not this particular one. I've used, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but I can't think of it. Anyway, a similar type where you mix two putties together and then they harden. Heard a lot of really good things about epoxy sculpt, so I wanted to get some and try that out. But I can use that to meld together some of the parts that don't actually fit. So the different things I'm going to end up using, the top of the torso from Frankenstein for sure, because Invisible Man doesn't have one. He just has the front shirt part in between the coat. But I want to use the legs from the Invisible Man because I like the stance. It's more of an action stance and kind of threatening, as opposed to Frankenstein. His legs are just in a relaxed pose together. And then definitely the head from Frankenstein. And that's kind of what got me thinking about him in the first place, is the head, because the thing has also the very pronounced, even more pronounced forehead sticking out than even Frankenstein, but his head's bald, so I'll have to sand down his hair somewhat and then use some epoxy sculpt to build that up, get rid of his neck bolts, that kind of thing. Maybe make his mouth look more menacing. The nose should be fine. The eyes I can open up a bit and give the image of it, and the ears are fine. So I think that'll work really good for the head. Going back and forth on the design or which arms to use. That one would probably be okay. I need to extend the forearm out a bit to put the hand on it. Nope, no hand. This one. I just wish that this hand was on the left side, right side I mean, with it having the open hand. But I can fix that. All of these, they can be reworked. It's somewhat open. Yeah, it's not bad. Because I want this hand to be holding the big board that he's holding in the still that I showed earlier. So, but I can work with that. And again, I have to build this up anyway with the claws and the little thorns and that kind of thing. So, thinking about using the Invisible Man's arm on the right side because it has already a bend in it. So I have to cut off a bit and move the angle of it. Nice thing is the arms are fairly close. And keep in mind this one is further out, but they can both be worked out to look like they match on the figure. And what I'm probably going to have to do with his coat, because I don't want a coat, it's a one piece or a tunic or whatever. I'll probably cut it off right about here. So I have that top part of the coat, and I'll be doing something with the collar, getting rid of it. And then the pants would go in or attached to that part and get them melted together, but they'll probably attach right there on those two grooves right there where the Frankenstein pants would go. So we'll see. We'll play with it. I just have to make it look like it's not a coat, but rather just a one piece together. So, and then the last thing I was looking at is I like using the Frankenstein shoes, except for the giant soles, obviously. So I'll cut that down. But I like the rounded profile. Looks pretty cool. And probably use the heel from the Invisible Man shoe on it, and then round out that front of it. So, but a lot of really good combinations I can do with these parts. I think they're going to work just great together to make my thing from another world. So very excited about it. So let me go ahead and do a little more mapping out, and then we'll start doing some cutting of the parts. All right, so I started some surgery on my two kits in order to start to fashion them into a shape that I can work with the epoxy sculpt. So the first thing I did was I cut the jacket bottom off, and it's a little uneven, but that's okay. It's not the final cut where that's going to be. I wanted to cut it down close to this little ridge here where the legs for Frankenstein fit into, and I'm going to have instead Invisible Man legs fitting into there. So it's a little closer to having an even match with the two. I still have to cut off some word around this edge here, so I smooth it out a bit so I get that look, because his waist comes down about narrow, and it's flush with the pants, and then it gets a little wider up to the shoulders. So I have to build up this area a little bit as well on it. Of course, I'll have to remove the detail of his jacket here and his collar, smooth that out in this little pocket here. I like the other definition though. It does kind of look a little muscular. I mean, it's supposed to be his coat, but in this case it'll double as the top of the jumpsuit for the thing. And then I'll have to fill in these holes over here, of course, with some putty. That's no big deal. Not putty, but epoxy sculpt. Working on the pants, I cut off that little tab there initially. I have to cut that inner part out. I might have to, I might not. We'll see. But I want to get a bit of a bend in the legs. So I drew some lines back on the back of the knee, where the knee would be. It's just very subtle, but it's right there. Right there, there's a slight point where the knee would be, because his legs are fairly straight. And so I cut that out. I'm going to try to carefully bend this back and glue it together. I might have to adjust that a bit. So let me give that a shot, and we'll get a little bend in those legs as well. All right, I'm still trying to come up with the final combinations for his whole body, his torso. The legs definitely I'm going to use from the Invisible Man, because I like the open leg stance. It's definitely more menacing as to what he would be as opposed to Frankenstein's legs, and they're also much thinner and narrower too. So definitely going to do those, and I've started to work on cutting out the back so I can make the knees bent a little bit. I keep working on that. I definitely like the arms of Frankenstein better, because even though they're straight, I can curve them, and I started doing that here too. As you can see, I cut it out. Probably what I'll end up doing, and I should have just done it at the beginning, is just cut it off flush, glue them in the right angle I want, and then just sand the elbow smooth the way I want it to be. Because his arm's going to be in like this, and the forearm bending up on about almost a 90-degree angle. Not quite that pronounced. And I can do the same thing with the right arm, although it doesn't really have to be. I can have his right arm just extended. I have to cut off the pin for the hand so I can move it in what position I want it to be. And then I'll have to just put some putty along this to the wrist to extend the sleeve to be a normal size sleeve. Same with this side here, sorry, as far as the arm is concerned. So the part that I'm still debating on is the top of the torso, basically, his chest. So I have the Frankenstein chest, which I've cut down considerably, and I've cut off the sides that were sticking out. I still have to cut that little bit off the back. And once this is all done, this is going to be glued together with the pants and puttied, so it'll be all smooth and blended together. And then I'll put on the details that you have on the monster for the jumpsuit, the different panels and things like that. Same with all this detail. This will all be sanded off. The collar will be sanded off and made what I want it to be. But I kind of like that look, the torso narrow down to the pants and then broad up in the shoulders. Especially when you have the arms on, it's even broader. And I can build it up a little bit more if I want to. But I did the same thing with the Invisible Man, but with his coat. So I put the coat together and I cut it in half. I just have the shirt part tacked in there because it doesn't have he doesn't have a top torso, he just has the coat. And of course that collar would be cut off. It wouldn't be on there. So it would similarly do the job. Sorry, trying to do this with one hand. But the pants are a little more made to fit inside of this torso, as you can see. The only downside is the shoulders are not quite as broad. And you have that right shoulder which is sticking up in the air. I don't want his right arm up in the air, or his left arm. So I'd have to cut that off. So still leaning back towards the Frankenstein. I thought maybe this would be better because it's a bulkier coat, so it would look like a broader body, but I'll probably stick with the Frankenstein at this point. I'm still liking how that's looking. I cut those supports off the bottom where the actual Frankenstein legs would fit into, so he can fit a little more up into there, and then I still have to finish smoothing off that profile, so it's a lot leaner. But I got it pretty much close down to the right width of the legs. Sorry, this one's not as easy to get together, obviously, so. Okay, but you can see they're getting closer. All right, so I'll keep working on that. Once I get this hashed out, then I can go ahead and look at getting them glued together and sanded and start doing some epoxy work. I also like this torso because obviously it would fit the arms in the right positions that I want to do for the Frankenstein arms, as opposed to trying to fit these into the sockets of the other coat. So, okay. All right, so work progresses on my Thing from Another World figure that I'm kit bashing from the Frankenstein and Invisible Man Mobius kits. So I'm kind of getting it down to the point where I'm having the general structure and shape of the body. Keep in mind that these are all roughly connected, and I'm going to be sanding down a lot more detail and also putting on some epoxy sculpt. My idea is that I will mix the putty together, and there's some decent working time on it. I'll try to flatten it out, maybe on a piece of wax paper or something, and make a really thin sheet of it so I can put it on certain parts, like the top of his torso where it has almost like a flap and a vest and that sort of thing. So we'll look at that more in the future. But for now, these are the general parts that I have roughly cut and put together. So I went ahead and did the idea that I said earlier, where I just cut off the joints that I wanted to bend and sanded them and then glued them back together. So there's kind of the rough stance of the legs, just a little bit, not a major bend, but he's going to be kind of leaning forward kind of a thing. I also cut the bottoms off of the Frankenstein shoes, so I have just the top, and they look kind of cool. They're almost the same kind of profile. He's wearing some kind of smooth boots So I think these are cool, and I like the line in the middle. I don't know why they had these in the Frankenstein boot, but I kind of like it. It gives it almost like a space look. Because if you look at the stills, he's supposed to basically be wearing some kind of uniform or a spacesuit in a way. He has belt on it and straps and things like that. So those are kind of cool. And I did the same with the arms. So here's the right or the left arm. I cut that off and put it on an angle. So that'll be angled out. And I decided to use the left hand because it's open to be gripping on the big wood block because it'll fit better. And the block will kind of go down to his side. I did the same on the right arm where I cut that off, and that one's just kind of angled out a bit as well, looking menacing. So let me go ahead and put these onto his top torso and show you how those arms are going to look. All right, there we go. So not a huge bit of a change, but the arms are coming out in a more menacing manner, like he's getting ready to grab something. Like he's coming at you. And that left arm there, like I said, I'm going to have a longer part of this kind of board sticking out there behind him. He's holding a big, almost like a railroad tie. It's like a 4x4, I think it would be, but it's much longer. So that's going to go through his arm, his hand, and go back behind him. And keep in mind too, like his arms, the sleeves are going to be extended out so they come up to the normal length, close to his wrists, so they'll look more natural. But I do like that kind of a V-shaped look with his broad shoulders coming down to a V for his waist. And then when that goes on to the pants, it's going to taper down to the pants, and then the pants are going to be kind of their normal look. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. I think that's coming along pretty well. It's still going to take some finagling, and a lot of this, like I said, is going to be glued together, and then once it sets up, I'm going to sand some more edges. See if I can get that on there. Sand down some of the rough parts. There we go. And use the epoxy sculpt to make the different patterns of his uniform. So, okay. But I think he's coming along pretty well. Alright, so I'm working on the arms and the head to get them completed so I can go ahead and get them attached to the torso, because I can't really do anything more until I get those parts all put together, because they're gonna have to be glued together. The way this top of Frankenstein is designed, you got to put the head in first and the arms in, because they have grooves and they click into place, as you can see. So I want to get those all done as far as sanding and putting on the epoxy sculpt to get the image that I want, as far as extending the sleeves, filling in the gaps, making the claws look appropriate with the little thorns sticking out of them, and then the head, of course, which I'm going to make look like the thing. So I've done some sanding on all of them. The main part here, the head, I've done a lot of sanding, and I've removed all of the hair from him. It's like a bald Frankenstein, as it were, and smoothed out some of the sharp edges. There's a lot of similarities between the thing and Frankenstein. Now, they were 20 years apart from the films, well, from the original. Original Frankenstein was made in '31, and The Thing from Another World was made in 1951. But there were several Frankenstein movies in between. So this became the iconic image of Frankenstein after the first one. So not unsurprising. I haven't really read anything, so I'm not stating this definitively. But I would imagine that they used a lot of the same kind of Frankenstein makeup and or masks in order to make them. the thing from another world, especially with the really pronounced forehead, that sort of thing. So his head is more rounded on the top and maybe a little wider. So it, like the torso, it starts wide at the top and comes down almost to a point with his chin. And I'll show you some stills of that of the thing here in a moment. But initially what I need to do, of course, is remove all the detail from him. So I did that, and now I'm going to start kind of using some images of the thing, which I'm going to start calling Jimmy, because he was played by James Arness, and it's a little easier than keep calling him a thing from another world. So Jimmy here, I'm smoothing out some of the facial features because he looked younger, of course. He didn't have a lot of wrinkles. I'm going to smooth out some of these really gaunt looks from Frankie. Take down the cheekbones, smooth them out a bit, and then look at sculpting the head a little bit more out. I also have to make his mouth look a little different. Not quite sure exactly, but I'm kind of working a bit on it. It looks like Frankie has a lower lip that's pressed back in. The upper lip seems to be okay. I'm just sanding that down a bit, and I'm gonna build up his lower lip, maybe make it a little bit wider, more pronounced. His eyes now are going to take some work because Frankie's eyes obviously are kind of nearly closed and sleepy looking, whereas the thing, they're open and they're wide. So I have to figure that out a bit, how to go about doing that. Possibly leaving the upper eyelid and taking down the lower one, and being able to, sorry, I had to move something there, and being able to get the wider eyes for him and get that going. Otherwise, the rest of his features are fine. They work out fairly well. Even his ears, I sanded them down a bit because they were sticking out a bit. And I'm going to build up some of the head behind it so it won't be quite, they won't be sticking out as much. And then work on doing some other facial features on him. So, okay. Alright, so I finished my sculpting of the head. I think it turned out really well. It'll look a lot better when I get a coat of primer on it and then the final paint job, but I built up his head obviously, and a lot of the image of him was the old alien image where they had the big enlarged head, I guess because they were supposed to have a bigger brain or something, I don't know. So like the Star Trek pilot with the aliens with the big heads that were sort of like this. But similar to Frankenstein, but more of a rounded head. Sorry, I'm staying focused. I also filled in his cheeks a bit because they were sunken. I sanded off his lip, which was back in, and built a new lip so that they're both the same level. I put the veins on the sides of his head and some other little markings in it. Come on and focus. There we go. And I made his ears somewhat pointed. Build up a little bit around them so they're not sticking out quite as far. And then I put in his eyes. I cut off the bottom eyelids, and I just put in those eyes, and they have sort of a notch going left to right. Which what I want to do is when I paint those, I'm going to paint the color. I'm thinking like a yellow with maybe some like red bloodshot around the edges of them, and then I could put some 5-minute epoxy, a dot of that over it to give it a clear look. So, and some scars in his big brain head, of course. All right, so he looks pretty good. He's dried overnight, so that's solid as a rock. I'm going to go ahead and get a coating of Tamiya fine surface primer on that. Let's see if I need to add any more. I also pretty much finished the right arm, I'm sorry, from his perspective. And again, some of this is hard to get an idea of because you have the mixture of the gray plastic and the white epoxy sculpt. But it'll look better again when I get a coat of primer on it. So we have his hand and his little claws on the ends. I notched the insides of the fingers and then I bent them down a bit. Excuse me. So they'd be a little different shape. They were a little too straight. And then I just sorry for the shaking there. I put some epoxy sculpt over top of the entire finger. Created the nail on the end. And then just using a toothpick, I made some different notches in them and then made the little claws sticking out of the top. And then I filled in that gap on the sleeve, Frankenstein's sleeve, extended the sleeve, but I shredded it, cut it up, put some slices in it because he was battling the sled dogs. So, okay. All right. So those are looking pretty cool. I'll make it a little more putty on his wrist to fill that in. It's looking a little smaller. And then I'll go ahead and get some primer on that as well. And just to show you the comparison, so there's his left arm, his left hand. And there's the right one. So it looks considerably larger. Looks more bulky and more monstrous. So, okay. Alright, so as you can see from the previous stills, I completed the arms with the epoxy sculpt. I've also begun doing some painting on them, which I'll show you here in a moment. So I completed the left arm with the claw. I didn't do all of the inner hand because that's going to be covered up. I used the left arm in order to hold a big piece of timber, because the hand for Frankenstein was already fairly well open to the right design. The right arm was not. It would have been a lot harder to try to adapt it, but this is a nicely shaped grip that I can put. So he's gripping this log, which is pretty cool. And that'll be stained as well, or have a brown wash on it to make it look like real wood. I also went ahead and covered the rest of the arms, including that band around his wrist, or upper wrist there, and coated the entire arm so it looks more complete. It all fits together. I also did a piece up here in the right shoulder, and where it's torn and ripped from the wolves the sled dogs attacking him. Keep thinking that they're wolves. And I put some tape in there and on here because I'm getting ready to get this painted here soon with the sleeve. I also painted the hand and I painted the head as well. Let me show you some stills of the head, and then I'll show you the colors that I'm using to do the painting. Alright, so here is the head, and I'm still kind of fiddling with it, but I think it's looking pretty cool. Remember, I'm going with Frankenstein. I have to work with the face itself, which is Frankenstein, so your mind's always wanting to put some of that image into it. But I get a little close up there. I put like a vertical line there with some black for the eyes, and then I put some clear epoxy over top of it to make the eyeball, which looks pretty cool, and some yellow in there, of course. And then I put some other clear yellow around it and some red, and I did some work on the mouth as well to kind of give it a bit of a grimace on him. So looking pretty cool. The initial color that I used for his head and for his hand is the color Sky from Tamiya. It's not really what you would think the sky. I guess the sky looks like that sometimes, but it's more of a really pale green. But it was a little too dark, so I mixed in a little bit of gray, some light gray, and some white, and I came up with this really pale green that I have in this bottle here. And that was the base coat. And this is how it looks just on the model before I do any kind of weathering or anything. You can just barely tell the difference between that and this white here, but you can see it's kind of a pale greenish look. And then what I did was I went ahead and used some wash on it, which is Citadel non-oil. It's like a black wash. Put it over it and then kind of dabbed it back off and let it settle into the cracks and give it a more realistic look, as you can see here. And then for the nails on this one, I used some flesh. These are all Tamiya's. I used some flesh, a little bit of yellow or white over top of them, some dry brushing on the joints of the claws on the front, and then the nails sticking up. I use a little bit of clear yellow to get that effect as well, so that looks pretty cool. I also have some of the green painted in there where I made the torn sleeve, which I put some tape over to protect it. Experimenting with and getting ready to put some paint on the sleeves, which would be the overall color of his jumpsuit. And the color I started with is Field Blue, but it's too dark. I tested it on the one sleeve and it was too dark, so I mixed that up as well with a little bit with some light gray and a little bit of white, and I came up with this blue, which is a lot lighter. And you can a little bit see that here on this sleeve. It's kind of a bluish gray. I painted the torn up sleeve because it would be hard to airbrush it. Right now I have it taped off so I can go ahead and airbrush this sleeve and the other one. And I have the connectors taped off so they're not going to get painted. All right, so let me go ahead and first of all get a wash onto this hand and the nails finished, and then I'm going to go ahead and tape off that hand. I'm going to get these painted that blue, and then I'll be ready to go ahead and get the arms glued onto the torso and figure out if I want to glue the head onto it or just at least make a space where the head can go in afterwards. And then I can start working on the torso and getting that contoured with the putty as well. with the epoxy sculpt. All right, so I wasn't overly happy with his expression on my sculpt. Something was missing. He looked kind of confused rather than like an angry monster. So I looked at some more stills, and I think my eyebrows were not as pronounced, the forehead. So I went ahead and did a little more sculpting, as you can see, and I curved them down in the front, in the middle there, to kind of give him that angry look about him. So I think that looks better, and created some abnormal little bumps on there because I think he has those on his head as well. So let me go ahead and get some of my homemade green on there, and then get it weathered and see how we look. Alright, so there we go. So I like that a lot better. He looks a lot more menacing and angry. Doesn't look confused anymore. So I'm glad I went ahead and added that on, and I had to weather it in again with some of my non-oil to make it look like the rest of his head. So, okay, I'm pretty pleased with that. I think I'm going to let that go at that point. It's enough tweaking. All right. All right, so now that I have the arms painted and finished up, I glued them onto the torso, the chest area, and on the top, and glued that together. I realized I had forgotten to put a claw on the thumb. I don't know if it was noticeable in the last video, but gladly I caught it. I went ahead and put one on it last night and let it harden and got that painted on as well. I don't know how I forgot that one, but so those are on there nicely. His little shoulder pads here are actually the parts that I cut off the bottom of his coat. I noticed that they had that nice little lip on the outer edge right there. If you look at some of the stills, it looks like his top, his shoulders go out a little bit, kind of a little bit of an overhang on his tunic. So I thought I'd put those on there, and then I'll build putty down around them for the chest area, and there's a flap that comes up over it. And then obviously fill in the front part, the top part here for the neck, and the collar for the head to go into there. So, all right. All right, so lots of puttying and sanding and not sanding, but sculpting and smoothing with the epoxy sculpt. All right, so as you can see, I got the pants glued on. I decided to do them at this odd angle to give it that action or menacing look. So his body's sort of his upper torso sort of twisted to the left, where his legs are going in the other direction. His head I'm going to have looking off to his left or our right, once I get that on there as well. So I got the leg joints puttied and drying, the waist. I got those shoulder joints connected in the back and smoothed out. It's kind of hard to tell where else I might need some more putty at this point until I let that dry. I still have to do the bring those two pads, shoulder pads, together and create the collar at the top for his head, and then on the front I just need to create a whole big, like a triangular, almost a wedge shaped piece of cloth coming up, and then it kind of hooks at the upper left there. You'll see when I have that going. And then I'm going to have a belt around his waist and some bands around the legs at the bottom. So, all right, so coming along pretty well. It's a little delicate because I got these delicate hands and I don't want to break any of the nails off before I get them all together and going. So, okay. All right, so I've got the coat of my bluish gray all over the bodysuit. I took the tape off of the arms that was protecting them. Did a little bit of touch up on them. Looking really cool. As you can see in the arms, I used some of the blue. I used some blue oil wash on there to give it more of a bluish tint. I wasn't real happy with the gray necessarily, so I got just some of this. It's just some oil paint, sky blue from Hobby Lobby. So I just mixed that with some odorless thinner, and I put it on as a it's kind of a wash. It's kind of hard to see it in the video. You can see some traces of blue, but it gives it more of a bluish tint. And then after that, what I'm doing is putting like some powders over it, some weathering powders to kind of bring down the shine a bit. So, okay, I have the flesh painted the green inside of the rips and letting that dry, and then I'll go ahead and put on some of the weathering on that as well. But just about finishing up on him. He's looking pretty sweet, and then I'll be working on the diorama for him. All right, and here is the finished figure. I have his head glued in place. I followed the same kind of theme where his legs are pointing off to one direction, his torso to the other, and his arms kind of offsetting it, and then his head as well doing the same thing. So it kind of gives him that weird stance, which looks pretty cool. I finished with the blue oil wash over the whole thing, kind of evened it out. And then to tone down any of the glossiness, I used some Tamiya weathering powders. I used the white snow. And I can use some more of that later once I get him onto the diorama. But kind of get an image of that, the snow. You can see I even left some of it on there pretty strongly because he's going to be in an outdoor scene where it is snowing. So he's going to have some traces of that on him. But it gave me a flatter finish to the bodysuit, makes it look more realistic. I have his flesh weathered in there where it's torn up on top. Okay. Of course, that one there. That little bit there on the end was a casualty a couple of times. When I had taped over it the last time to paint the torso, it broke off again, so I ended up gluing it on with some AC glue. And again, you can see some more of that weathering powder right there. But all right, looking pretty cool. All right, so all I have to do is glue on his big board, and I use a light brown wash to kind of make that look more wooden, but I'll probably do some more work on it. That'll go in his hand as well, so that'll look pretty sweet. Okay, fantastic. So I'll finish this video up with a couple of stills of him, and then on the next video on to his diorama, which is going to bring this kit all together. So all right, well, thank you to all my new viewers, all my new subscribers. Stay tuned, and we'll continue working on Jimmy the Thing from Another World.